welcome to another episode of Throwing It Back with Sean Farrell. I am Sean Farrell. God is great all the time. All the time, God is great. And let's not waste no time. Let's get right to it, shall we? Okay, so the Cleveland Cavaliers nearly moved to Toronto in the early 80s, believe it or not. Okay? The Cleveland Cavaliers nearly moved to Toronto in the early 80s, okay? And you may raise your eyebrows and be like, huh? But yeah, it did happen. It happened. So let me break. So I'm about to break. Take it down. Okay, so I'm about to break. Take it down. So let's take it back briefly to when the Cavaliers were an expansion team. Okay, they came into the NBA in 1970, and their first coach was Bill Fitch. Believe it or not, yes. Boston Celtics Bill Fitch, yes. Houston Rockets Bill Fitch, yes. That Bill Fitch. And so Cavaliers' first coach was Bill Fitch, okay? And he coached Cleveland from 1970 through 1979. So he was the Cavaliers' only coach for the decade of the 1970s, okay? So he was there for 9 years, okay? Was the coach the entire decade of the 70s. And by 1976, the Cavaliers made their first appearance in the playoffs, going 49-33. And they came within 2 games of the 1976 NBA Finals when they lost to the Boston Celtics 4-2 in the Eastern Conference Finals. Okay? So, Fitch guided the Cavaliers to the playoffs in 1976, 1977, 1978. Then had a bad season with Cleveland in 1979. And then he moved on to Boston after 1979. And of course, rest is history. Won the NBA championship with the Celtics. Coached the Rockets to the 86 finals as well. So there's that happy piece of history. So in the early 80s, the Cavaliers were bought by a guy named Ted Stepien. If I said that right, I'm going to butcher this name hundreds of times, okay? So if I butcher the name, I'm sorry. I apologize in advance. But the Cowboys. The Cavaliers, okay, were bought by a guy named Ted Stepien. Ted Stepien, okay. That sounds better. Ted Stepien, okay. Anyway, so he bought the Cavaliers in 1980, and the Cavs almost became the NBA's first Canadian franchise. And the Cavaliers nearly became the Toronto Towers. What the hell kind of NBA team name is that? Can you imagine the Boston Celtics going into Toronto in the 80s and playing the Toronto Towers? Come on, man. How corny does that sound? Anyway, so a deal was basically done with Toronto. Ted Stepien even held up the brand new logo for the Toronto Towers. And he had a smile on his face, but no, I'm gonna continue to break it down. He used to be in the ad industry. He had a lot of success in the advertising industry. But people said he was very ill equipped owning an NBA franchise. They say he had no acumen when it came to basketball. Okay. And when he took over the Cavaliers in 1980, he approved transactions. I believe he approved like 4 different transactions within 5 months. Okay. And the Cavaliers gave up 4 years worth of draft picks, 83, 84, 85, and 86, for players who, what they call, flamed out. Okay. So, the players that were taken in the 83, 84, 85, and 86 draft in the first round were 1983, Derek Harper, 1984, Sam Perkins, 1985, Detlef Shrimp, 1986, Roy Harpley. Okay. Now, out of all these 4 draft picks, Roy Tarpley probably had the shortest career. Okay. But combined, all these players who were drafted in the first round, they played a combined 3,900 games. Okay. So the players that the Cavaliers got back in those trades, in those trading away those first round picks, were a guy named Mike Bratz. He played 1 season with the Cavaliers, played in 80 games, averaged 10 points per game in his only season in 1980-81. A guy by the name of Richard Washington. He played 2 years with the Cavaliers, 81 and 82. No, 1980 through 82. I believe he was acquired early in the 81 season, but he averaged 10 points per game in 1981 and 6.1 points per game in 1982. Then there was a guy named Jerome Whitehead. He only played 3 games with the Cavaliers in 1980-81. He averaged half a point per game. And there was a guy by the name of Jeff Houston. Okay. All right. Hold it. I butchered that name too, man. I butchered that name too. Okay. I believe the guy's name is Jeff Hudson. Yeah. H-U-S. Okay, the guy's name is Jeff Huston. Okay, Jeff Huston. And before he came to Cleveland, he was with the Mavericks. Okay, so when he got traded to the Cavaliers early in the 81-82 season, okay, he was averaging 16 points per game with the Dallas Mavericks. Okay. The guy was averaging 16 points a game for the Dallas Mavericks. Okay. Then when he came to Cleveland, a little into the 81-82 season, he only averaged 7 points per game. Okay. And so he spent about 4.5 to 5 years with the Cavaliers. 1982, 10.3 points per game. 1983, 12.2 points per game. 1984, 10.5 points per game. And he only played in 8 games in 1985, averaging 3.5 points per game. Okay. And so, Commissioner Larry O Brien saw the atrocious moves that were being made by the Cleveland Cavaliers. He saw all the atrocious moves that the Cleveland Cavaliers were doing, okay? This is just how much a joke the Cleveland Cavaliers were in the 80s. Okay. When they when the Cavaliers under Bill Fitch were respectable, okay? They didn't make the playoffs every year, but they were respectable, and eventually they did make the playoffs, okay? But this is how inept the Cleveland Cavaliers were in the early 1980s, okay? They were so inept that Commissioner O Brien had to put what they call a memorial tom. I butchered that name too. I butchered that word too. Had to put a memorial tom on the Cavs, requiring league approval anytime the Cleveland Cavaliers made a transaction, okay? And that was called the Stepien rule. The Ted Stepien rule, okay? Which exists even in the NBA to this day. And what that rule basically states is you can't trade first round picks in consecutive seasons. Okay, so that was the Stepien rule right there. And so, in March of '83, Ted Stepien was going to move the team to Toronto. Okay, and the ineptness of the Cleveland Cavaliers was on full display in the early 80s. Check this out. They won only 66 games in a 3-year period. Okay. So in 1981, they finished 28-54, and they had 2 coaches that year. Bill Musselman, okay? And they had a coach by the name of Don Delaney. Don Delaney, okay? Who actually coached a pro softball team. And in case you didn't hear me, the Cavaliers had a coach by the name of Don Delaney who used to coach a pro softball team, okay? Go figure. So, in 1982, they finished 15-67. They had 4 coaches that year. Don Delaney, Bob Kloppenberg, and Chuck Daly. Yes, that Chuck Daly. That Chuck Daly, who went 9-32 with the Cavaliers. And Bill Musselman was also the head coach. So they had 4 coaches in the 1982 season. Then in 1983, they only had 1 head coach, Tom Nassau-Hawkey, okay? So, yeah. That's how inept the Cleveland Cavaliers were, okay, in the early 80s. Lord have mercy. Lord have mercy. Okay. So, Lee Roth was a reporter for the Cleveland Cavaliers in those days. And, he remembers Ted Stepien tossing softballs off the roof of a 52-story terminal tower, okay? For the 50th anniversary of the terminal tower. So he broke a few windshields, to say the least, and he actually injured a few people by hurting their wrists by tossing softballs off the tower. People say he was a affable guy off the court, but as an NBA owner, he was just completely overwhelmed. He was completely over his head, which kind of reminds me when David Stern was commissioner. When David Stern was near the end of being commissioner, he had a saying: the the owner of the New Orleans Hornets at that time, Dale Demps. David Stern said he's the worst owner in the league. Dale Demps, the worst owner in the league. Okay. So Kurt Schneider, who was a lawyer, involved in the potential move of the Cavs to Toronto, said he was the worst owner in the history of pro sports. Okay. And so Lee Roth also said whenever the fans of the media were critical of the team, the threat was from Ted was, hey, I'm going to move this team to Toronto. Okay. And they say he loved Cleveland. Ted loved Cleveland. But he was more than willing to move the Cavaliers to Toronto to be the Toronto Towers. Okay. So he was losing. The Cavaliers were, Ted was losing money. Ted was losing money. And the Cavaliers, they were losing money as a team as well. The Cavaliers franchise as a whole was losing money, mainly due to lack of attendance. Check this out, okay? So, beginning in 1979, Bill Fitch's last season in Cleveland, they averaged 7,942 fans a year. 1980, 7,873. 1981, 5,475. 1982, 5,769. 1983, 3,916. 1984, 5,075 fans. 1985, 7,902. 1986, 9,533. 1987, 10,905. Okay. And that's when the team started to become competitive. Okay. You know, that year they had Ron Harper, Brad Daugherty, Mark Price, Hot Rod Williams was in his first year. So the team became competitive in 1987. And then, obviously, after 1987, rest is history. Okay. So, there was a guy by the name of Leo Routins. He was a small forward for Syracuse, and he remembers running into Ted. Okay. And he asked Ted, he said, because he was at a hockey game when he ran into a Ted Stepien. And he said, Ted, is it true that you're moving the Cavaliers to the to Toronto? And Ted said, we're working on it. Okay. So there was a deal that was actually in place. Okay. So Harold Ballard, who was the owner of the Toronto Maple Leafs at that time, okay, in 1983, Harold Ballard was the owner of the Toronto Maple Leafs, and he and Ted had already worked it out that the Toronto Towers would be playing their games at Maple Leaf Gardens, and then immediately after the 83 season, they would start selling tickets. Okay? They would immediately start selling tickets after the 83 season. And, you know, Ted Stepien was always trying to make his splash. You're not going to believe this, y'all. In 1981, they tried to get Wilt Chamberlain out of retirement and have him sign a deal to make him play for him to only play in home games. Okay? Now I understand it. Because in 1981, they were only averaging 5,475 fans. Okay? So I kind of get it. So they tried to lure Wilt Chamberlain out of retirement. but Whoop said no. Okay. And so it was around, so on April 7th, 1983, George and Gordon Gunn, who owned the Richfield Coliseum, okay, they put together a deal that they would purchase nationwide advertisement and the Cleveland Cavaliers for $22 million. So Ted Stepien would sell the team to George and Gordon Gunn. Okay. And of course, in the mid 90s, the Cleveland Cavaliers moved into their new arena, which was called Gund Arena. Okay. And so, so when Ted sold the team to the Gunn brothers, the NBA owners also awarded the Cleveland Cavaliers the first round draft picks that Ted traded away when he first bought the team. Okay. So the Cavaliers would have a first round pick in the 83 draft, 84, 85, and 86. Okay. So basically that was all of the NBA owners helping the Cleveland Cavaliers clean up the mess that Ted Stepien created when he first bought the team. Okay. And so on April 7th, 1983, the Cavaliers were bought. Took a few years to turn around the damage, but